17 radar stations went dark simultaneously across 4 countries. No warning, no technical malfunction, no solar interference. In less than 40 minutes, Iran's Revolutionary Guard executed the most sophisticated coordinated blind strike in modern Middle Eastern history and wiped out the eyes of the most powerful military machine ever assembled. But here is the detail that should stop you cold. Some of those stations were not destroyed by missiles or drones. They were destroyed from the inside, by assets already positioned on the ground. The enemy was not coming. The enemy was already there. Let me make sure you fully understand the weight of what just happened. Because the television coverage will focus on explosions and diplomatic statements and oil prices. But the real story, the story that will define the next decade of global power competition, is about something far more fundamental than 17 destroyed radar dishes. What Iran just proved is that the entire architecture of American military dominance in the Middle East, 3 decades of satellites, sensors, fusion centers, and billions of dollars worth of integrated air defense infrastructure, can be dismantled in 40 minutes by an adversary that Washington spent years systematically underestimating. And if that is true in the Middle East, then every security guarantee America has made to every ally in every region of the world just became a question mark instead of a certainty. This is not a regional story. This is a story about the limits of superpower dominance in the modern age. And the implications reach from Tel Aviv to Taipei. To understand what Iran actually did and why it is so significant, you have to understand what the United States built in that region over 30 years. The American military does not just deploy weapons and soldiers. It deploys a complete information ecosystem. Every radar station is a vital artery feeding a constant stream of raw telemetry into central intelligence fusion centers. Satellite imagery, intercepted radio signals, thermal signatures of aircraft and missiles, all of it flows continuously into what the military calls the common operational picture. When that picture is whole and functioning, American commanders can see the entire battlefield in near real time. They know where every aircraft is, they know what trajectories incoming missiles are following. They know the difference between a commercial flight and a threat vector before any pilot or politician even has to make a decision. The common operational picture is what transforms military hardware from isolated weapon systems into an integrated network that is exponentially more powerful than the sum of its parts. And that is precisely what Iran targeted. Not the weapons, not the bases, not the aircraft carriers, the eyes. Because without the eyes, everything else is blind and slow and reactive. The 17 stations that were taken down were not randomly selected. This is the detail that the Pentagon's internal assessment must be confronting right now with genuine alarm. The selection of these specific targets reveals a level of intelligence preparation that is frankly staggering in its depth and precision. 3 of the destroyed stations were the primary sentinels for the flight corridors connecting Ain al-Assad Air Base in western Iraq to the protected airspace over Jordan. 4 stations were the primary surveillance nodes watching the northern approaches to the Strait of Hormuz. 6 were specifically positioned to monitor the land bridge routes used by Hezbollah and Iraqi militia networks to move sensitive military technology from Tehran toward the Mediterranean coast. And the final 4, the ones that have sent Israeli security officials into emergency sessions, were the exact sensors that Israel depends upon for early warning of ballistic missile launches from Iranian territory. These are the radars designed to detect the specific heat signatures and flight trajectories of Iranian ballistic missiles the instant they leave their launch pads. Under normal conditions, a missile fired from central Iran gives Israeli air defense systems between 8 and 11 minutes to detect, track, classify, and intercept the threat. With those 4 stations gone, Israeli Defense Ministry officials confirmed that in the affected corridors, detection to impact time could be as short as 3 to 5 minutes. For context, 3 minutes is barely enough time for automated defense computers to achieve a targeting lock. It is nowhere near enough time for civilian populations to reach shelters. Iran did not just attack hardware. Iran attacked the time that stands between a missile launch and mass casualties on Israeli soil. Now the question that is haunting every intelligence agency in Washington right now is not tactical. It is existential. How long was Iran planning this? How did they move assets, equipment, and personnel across 4 sovereign nations into position for a perfectly synchronized 17-target strike without a single Western intelligence asset detecting the preparation? The Pentagon confirmed the strikes. The CIA is conducting what officials privately describe as a comprehensive review of regional intelligence architecture. The answer to that question leads to one of 2 conclusions, and both of them are genuinely alarming. Either Iran has developed a method of operational planning that is completely invisible to the National Security Agency's Global Signals Intelligence Network, which would represent a generational leap in Iranian military sophistication. Or Iran has compromised the data fusion systems that Western intelligence uses to monitor Iranian military activity, which would mean Tehran understands the inner architecture of American intelligence collection well enough to hide inside its blind spots deliberately. If either of those conclusions is correct, the foundation of Western military superiority in the region is not as solid as 30 years of dominance made it appear. The methods used in this operation deserve particular scrutiny because they reveal something important about where Iranian military doctrine has traveled over the past decade. Iraqi security officials confirmed, and Jordanian government sources corroborated, that the operation used at least 3 distinct attack vectors simultaneously. First, low-altitude cruise missiles with terrain-following flight profiles designed specifically to fly beneath the radar coverage of the very stations they were targeting. The technical specifications of the Sumar and Hoveze cruise missile variants that Iranian state television has previously showcased suggest these systems were programmed with precise waypoints to navigate through gaps in overlapping radar coverage zones. That level of mission programming requires not just a map of where the radars are located, it requires deep knowledge of their pulse repetition frequencies, their look-down angles, and their coverage geometries. That is information that was previously considered the exclusive domain of Western intelligence services. Second, long-range suicide drones equipped with electronic suppression systems that jammed local radar frequencies in the seconds immediately before missile impact, ensuring that even stations with enough warning to begin transmitting a distress signal were prevented from completing it. Third, and this is the detail that changes the entire strategic picture, in at least 4 locations across Iraq and Jordan, the destruction was not caused by any airborne weapon at all. It was caused by ground-based assault teams, pre-positioned operative cells that conducted direct kinetic attacks on the radar facilities in perfect synchronization with the aerial strikes. This means Iran did not just fire weapons from its own territory. It activated assets that were already inside the territory the United States and its allies consider controlled. The enemy was not approaching. The enemy was already there, waiting for the signal. The implications of that single fact for the concept of a U.S.-controlled sphere of influence in the Middle East are profound. If Tehran can position and sustain combat-ready operative teams adjacent to 17 high-value targets across 4 countries, Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and the Persian Gulf Maritime Zone, without any of those cells triggering a counterintelligence detection in months of preparation, then the American security perimeter is not a perimeter at all. It is a perception, a diplomatic narrative maintained by the absence of a direct challenge. Iran just issued that challenge, and the challenge was answered with silence from the ground assets that were supposed to prevent it. The immediate fallout for the Israeli defense establishment is being felt at every level. Israel's layered air defense system, the Arrow 3 designed for exo-atmospheric intercepts of ballistic missiles, the Arrow 2 for mid-range threats, David's Sling for medium-range missiles, and Iron Dome for short-range rockets, is extraordinarily capable. But every one of those systems depends critically on early detection data flowing from the sensor network that now has 4 massive gaps on its eastern flank. Israeli defense minister officials have not publicly commented on the operational details, but the convening of an emergency security cabinet session and the visible increase in Israeli Air Force activity over the eastern Mediterranean tells the story clearly enough. Israel is recalculating its defensive posture in real time, based on a threat environment that changed fundamentally in 40 minutes. For the broader coalition, the economic arithmetic of this strike is brutal, in ways that will compound over the 90 to 120 days that defense logistics officials estimate will be required to restore the destroyed infrastructure. Every day that the radar net has significant gaps, the U.S. Air Force must fly suppression of enemy air defenses missions to provide partial airborne radar coverage over the blind zones. These missions involve F-35s, F-22s, and specialized electronic warfare aircraft operating on extended loiter cycles over active combat environments. Defense analysts with access to operational cost data have estimated that maintaining this kind of compensatory airborne coverage in the affected corridors costs between $4 million and $7 million per day in fuel, munitions, and airframe wear. Over a 90-day reconstruction period, that is a minimum of $360 million in unbudgeted operational costs just to maintain a degraded version of the awareness that existed before the strike. And that calculation does not include the cost of replacing the destroyed hardware, reinforcing the physical security of rebuilt sites, or the intelligence assessment reviews that will consume significant resources across every major Western agency for months. In the Strait of Hormuz, the effects are already visible in financial markets. With the northern surveillance nodes covering the strait's approaches now dark, the integrated maritime awareness system that provides commercial shipping with confidence about safe transit has significant blind zones. Insurance providers in the Lloyd's of London market have already begun repricing war risk premiums for vessels transiting the Persian Gulf. A 12% spike in coverage costs was confirmed by maritime insurance officials in the first hours after the strikes. If that premium reaches 20%, and the trajectory suggests it could within days if the gaps are not closed, the economics of global shipping through the strait begin to shift in ways that affect every economy on Earth. Medium-capacity shipping fleets will route around the Cape of Good Hope rather than absorb the insurance cost. That rerouting adds up to 3 weeks of additional transit time for oil and gas shipments destined for European and North American markets. Crude oil futures markets began pricing this disruption risk within hours of the first confirmed reports. The Pentagon's decision-making in the next 72 hours will be watched with intense analytical focus from Moscow and Beijing for reasons that go well beyond the immediate military situation. For Russian military planners, the Iranian operation provides real-world validation of theoretical frameworks about exploiting procedural and technical vulnerabilities in American military networks that Russian doctrine has been developing since the late 2000s. For the People's Liberation Army, this operation is something more specific and more valuable. Chinese military analysts have spent years developing theoretical models for how to degrade American response capabilities in a Taiwan Strait scenario. They have wargamed the problem of how to blind American early warning and command networks in the Indo-Pacific as a precondition for any military action across the strait. Seeing Iran execute a successful coordinated blinding operation against American infrastructure across 4 countries in 40 minutes is not just strategically interesting to Beijing. It is a case study, a proof of concept. China's foreign ministry released a statement calling for restraint and de-escalation, while Chinese military officials quietly began what will certainly be an extensive analytical review of every technical detail of the Iranian operation that they can collect. Now let me give you 3 clear scenarios, because you deserve a real assessment of where this goes. In the first scenario, this was a calibrated strategic message. Iran executed the strike to demonstrate capability and establish deterrence. To communicate to Washington and Tel Aviv that further military pressure carries costs that the coalition has not yet fully priced. Under this scenario, Iran follows the strike with back-channel communications through third parties, possibly Qatar or Oman, signaling willingness to return to some version of the negotiated framework that was nearly complete before recent escalations. The radar strike was the leverage. The offer comes next. This scenario is possible, but it requires both sides to exercise a level of strategic discipline that the recent trajectory of this conflict has not consistently demonstrated. In the second scenario, this was a shaping operation. In military planning doctrine, a shaping operation is a preparatory strike designed to degrade enemy capabilities before a larger follow-on action. Shaping operations are characterized by willingness to reveal previously hidden capabilities because the planners anticipate moving to the next phase before the adversary can fully react. If Iran just revealed its ability to strike 17 targets simultaneously across 4 countries as preparation for something larger, a significant missile barrage against Israeli or American military infrastructure, a move to close the Strait of Hormuz through mine-laying and naval harassment, a coordinated militia offensive across multiple fronts simultaneously, then the window before the next phase is not measured in weeks. It is measured in days or hours. The Pentagon's positioning of additional assets in the region and the tempo of Israeli Air Force activity will be the clearest early indicators of which assessment American and Israeli intelligence currently holds. In the third scenario, the loss of institutional control produces the outcome nobody planned for. The IRGC demonstrated with this operation that elements of the Iranian military establishment are capable of executing complex, multi-theater operations independently. Iran's new post-Khamenei leadership is untested and operating under enormous domestic and external pressure simultaneously. If internal factions within the IRGC conclude that their window of operational advantage is closing as the coalition works to restore the radar network, the incentive to use that window before it closes creates exactly the kind of pressure that produces uncontrolled escalation. Not because any single leader decided war was the right choice, but because the institutional momentum of a military establishment that just proved it can strike with impunity creates its own logic. This scenario is the most dangerous precisely because it does not require a deliberate decision by Iran's political leadership. It only requires the IRGC to conclude that restraint is no longer strategically rational. Here's the conclusion that I need you to sit with. The 30-year era of unchallenged American air and intelligence dominance in the Middle East ended in 40 minutes. It did not end because America was defeated in battle. It ended because an adversary that America systematically underestimated for 20 years patiently built the capabilities, the intelligence, the pre-positioned assets, and the operational sophistication to execute a strike that the most expensive surveillance architecture in human history failed to detect in preparation or prevent in execution. The 17 dark spots on the radar display at Al Udeid are not just destroyed hardware. They are the physical evidence of an assumption that turned out to be wrong. The assumption that technological superiority is self-sustaining. That dominance once established maintains itself. That the adversary you can see on paper is the adversary you actually face on the battlefield. History has never been kind to that assumption. And history just delivered that lesson again in 40 minutes across 4 countries and 17 smoking sensor sites. What comes next will be determined by decisions made in the next 72 hours in Washington, in Tel Aviv, in Tehran, and in Beijing. And every one of those decisions will be made by leaders operating with incomplete information, enormous domestic pressure, and the knowledge that one miscalculation could trigger consequences that nobody in any of those capitals is prepared to manage. Tell me what you think in the comments right now. Do you believe this was Iran sending a calculated deterrent message? Or was this the opening move of something far larger that we have not yet seen? That question may be the most consequential one in the world today. Leave your answer below. And if this kind of deep, unfiltered, unflinching analysis is what you need to actually understand what is happening in the world, subscribe right now and turn on notifications immediately, because the next development in this story will not wait, and you cannot afford to be behind on it.